And so good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to have all the various colleagues with us today. My pleasure to be able to talk to you about the CETA work and our place-based learning program agreement regulations 2018. That's the topic of our discussion this morning. I will, as we go, I will also explain a little bit why I put the place in brackets around these regulations. So I want to thank the ASDSA as well for continuing to make this platform available, and these conversations that we have for our members on these Friday mornings. It really is a really nice facility. So thanks very much to Angelique and the team, Andy, and the rest of the colleagues that work so hard at keeping this going. So colleagues, these regulations, as you can see on that first slide, were published 16th of November 2018. They they came into effect on the 1st of April 2019. So they were in fact finalized and issued close to 4.5 months before the effective date. And so the CETAs in particular did have quite a little bit of time to adjust their systems, and all the various providers and stakeholders in the system. So there was a bit of time. But I got the sense from various comments that I've heard over the period of time since then, and even more recently, that there was a bit of surprise from quite a lot of colleagues around these regulations. That's what I was trying to depict with my little emoji there that says, wow, where did these come from? And so on. So just the other thing I really want to stress is that these learning program agreement regulations completely replaced the learnership regulations of 2007. So this was a complete replacement. The old regulations disappeared and the new ones came into play. Just a brief.
Sorry.
Yes, Andy.
From me before you go away from that. When I look at it, the title of this thing, it's Workplace-Based Learning Program Agreement. It seems to signal a real change in focus from formal learning to what learning that takes place in the workplace itself. Am I being optimistic in thinking that this really is saying, let's look at what happens at the workplace? That's where the most important learning takes place.
So Andy, thank you for that. That is an excellent observation. And in fact, this was really one of the most significant shifts in our skills development system that actually goes all the way back to 2008 when we changed the Act. The colleagues will know that the Skills Development Act that was promulgated in 1998, in the functions of the CETAs, Section 10 of the Act, said that the CETAs must develop and implement learnerships, and only learnerships. However, there was a lot of debate in those first 5 years between 1998 and running up until about 2005 about what about other workplace-based learning programs, such as apprenticeships and internships, etc. And we'll cover some of the others just now. So Andy, your observation is perfectly correct. This was a significant shift in moving us much more towards learning in the workplace. In fact, the regulation, in my opinion, in fact, may even be wrongly titled. It should possibly be the work-based learning program agreement regulations and not workplace-based. There is a bit of in the end, it's a subtle difference, but work-based allows simulations and things like that, whereas workplace-based means it's actually on the job. And all over the world, the more generic expression now is work-based. And so particularly the International Labour Organization, many of the European systems are work-based processes, which allows for simulation much more than workplace. So yes, so this was a significant shift towards work-based learning, which of course is the whole focus of occupational qualifications, or the new QCTO qualification. So it supports that. Hopefully I've answered you.
Then add another comment on that,
Yeah.
So the focus of professional body is about workplace competence. And that's what our designations are all about. So that further underscores the growing emphasis on getting a designation. That's what government is wanting us to do. Am I right?
Absolutely, because it professionalizes, it expands the work-based learning environment. Minister Nzimande coined a phrase many, many years ago, which some of you may have forgotten, but he used to say that the biggest training space is the workplace. There's no bigger training space in South Africa than actual workplaces, because there are so many more workplaces where people can learn than university classrooms or training providers or something. So the biggest training space is the workplace. So, and the more professional we can get it in the workplace, the better. Okay, so moving on, Andy, otherwise you and I will have a lack of chat as usual, but let's see if we can have a look at the quick journey. Colleagues, just to...
sorry, before you go, just a comment from John Arneson. He comments the clarification of workplace versus work-based is subtle, but extremely important. Thanks for highlighting this.
Yes, no, it is critically important. Yeah, and of course, the whole new virtual world of learning has made that subtlety even more pronounced, and so on. Very, very important. So I'm hoping that as we go forward, when the department and the stakeholders change these regulations, they will be amended. I'm absolutely convinced, because there are a few errors in the regulations that we just need to fix. But there was also one or two areas where we need to make it even better. As we move forward, I believe, hopefully, it will be called work-based learning program agreement regulations. Interestingly enough, John and the other colleagues, Annexure A, which is the sample contract that people sign, the sample agreement, is actually called a work-based learning program agreement. So they actually dropped the word place in Annexure A. And that to me was actually, maybe it was just a Freudian slip, but it certainly is to me the correct terminology. Okay, so guys, in 1998, Section 10 of the Skills Development Act said learnerships. We got the learnership regulations. 2001 was the first set, 2007 was the second set. I had the pleasure of writing the 2007 regulations when I was in the Department of Labor. And then in 2008, the most significant change, Section 10 of the Skills Development Act was changed to say that CETAs must develop and implement learning programs. We changed the word learnership to learning programs in the Act. Remember, the Act is the primary legislation, and regulations always follow from that. And the definition of learning programs, all of us will know now, it includes a learnership, apprenticeship, skills program, and then very important, that expression that says, and any other program that includes structured work experience component. And that now opened the door for candidacies, internships, cadetships, and all sorts of other ships that included the workplace. So that opened the door in 2008. But now, colleagues, you'll notice that it took us almost 11 years between changing the Act in 2008 to these new regulations coming out in 2018. And I can tell you that length of time caused a lot of difficulties in the system, because the learnership regulations were still the basis for contracting learners and not learning programs. And it was a really tough process to get these regulations out. And the reason for that is, you may recall that in April 2009, the Department of Higher Education and Training was established. And all the skills development legislation, regulations, and all the expertise, the skills, the people with the institutional knowledge were all moved across from the Department of Labor. And we were amalgamated with, amongst others, the universities. This is the first time ever that universities were now sitting in the same room as people that were developing skills for work-based learning. And then we also had the public TVET colleges and the ABET centers, who are now called community education colleges, all in the same room. And so when we started to carry on working with these originally they were simply called learning program regulations. The university colleagues particularly said, but hang on guys, you know, there are also work-based learning that happens at universities. And many of you will remember the cooperative education models Technicons used to use, and there are still some of those programs around. And that is where the candidacy started to feature. I will recall that when we were working on these processes in 2012, 13, trying to get these regulations out, the Engineering Council of South Africa particularly came very strongly into the picture and said, we really do need to fund candidate engineers, and of course, doctors and nurses and internships and so on. So that creation of what we now know as the post-school education and training system, which was formalized in 2013 with a white paper, it took a huge amount of discussion and interaction to eventually result in a regulation that we have in front of us now that effectively allows for any person in any workplace to be funded by the CETAs across a whole range of different programs. That is why it took so long, and but we've got it now, and I think we can only improve on it as we go. Colleagues, this slide is probably the most important part of the regulation that we really do need to understand. And this is what I'm trying to illustrate, is that those work-based learning programs that are listed there, number 1 down to number 9, apprenticeship, internship, the various internships, candidacies, and so on, tries to cover the entire post-school education and training system, and in particular, the public institutions. The one thing that the private training providers were very good at, and are very good at, is in fact work-based learning. They actually do it all the time. They've done it for many, many years, and they are really good at it. But our public institution, which is where the very large numbers are, it's where the volumes are, it's where now a large portion of the funding is going, have never really been that good at work-based learning. And that is what this regulation is trying to move us towards, so that the post-school system, particularly the public portion of it, becomes much more demand-led. Or as a colleague recently said to me, it must be industry demand-led, because the word demand-led could be sometimes interpreted as the demand from the institutions, demand from a university, demand from a college. But that's not what we mean by demand-led. We mean industry demand-led. And so you'll see the various types of public institutions that are listed there. I'm sure all the colleagues will recognize the acronyms. I don't have to explain them. Maybe just one, the CETC is the Community Education and Training Colleges. There are now 9 of them, which are effectively the old AET centers, adult education training centers, that have been amalgamated. And that is where a lot of emphasis has been placed now for the future, for skills programs, to allow people to start entering with small learning, maybe even micro-credentialing learning, and then move through the college system and into higher education and training. Just a note, the BBEE Act and Section 12H of the Tax Act both need to have adjustments made to them to align to this workplace-based learning program agreement regulation and the definitions of all these learning programs, because they are not aligned. They are still predominantly aligned to the previous learnership regulations. And so the learning program matrix, I think they call it in the BBEE Act, there needs to be alignment there. And Section 12H of the Tax Act, who all of you will know, currently only really allows for allowances against learnerships, stroke apprenticeships. If you really push your luck, you will get apprenticeships given tax allowances, because the Skill Development Act says that the learnership is an apprenticeship. But we need the Section 12H Act to be expanded and broadened so that employers, business people that take on internships, candidacies, and so on, can also benefit from those allowances. If National Treasury and the fiscus have the money, I'm not sure. That is another debate altogether. but certainly it would really create a huge stimulus and incentive for the country if we could have that Section 12H expanded. And I think Andy and the colleagues from ASDSA, the leadership, if we have the opportunity to motivate for that, we can, lobby around that with various structures, particularly National Treasury. I think it would help so many providers and the learners. Now, colleagues, the next slide is a very busy slide, but what I've tried to do is just on the left-hand side were the leadership regulations of 2007, and on the right-hand side are the new ones, the workplace learning-based agreement regulations of 2018. And I just want to pick up on kind of 4 significant changes that we need to be aware of. First of all, obviously, the one that I've already referred to is the expansion of work-based or workplace-based learning programs in the new regulations. Originally, only learnerships. Now we have a whole range of workplace things. They are defined in the regulation. The Annexure A, the first part of that Annexure A gives you definitions. You need to study those definitions, understand them. They are sometimes quite open to interpretation. And so hopefully as we go forward, when we have the next iteration of these regulations, they could become sharper. Just to pick up on the candidacy, candidacy refers directly to the registration as a professional in the required professional designation as stipulated by a professional body. And so, colleagues, this is important. If we can convince the SETAs or the National Skills Fund or any other funder to formally register us as a candidate towards becoming a professional designation on a professional body, this regulation allows for it. So I think it's a significant move forward, as is all the different internships that are now also covered under these regulations. So that's the first particular significant change. The other one, colleagues, you will notice that the 2017 regulation had a lot to say about ASDSA, Employment Services Development Lead Agencies. They're gone. That Employment Services Skill Development Service Agency, the ASDSA concept didn't really work. It was piloted. So when we did the 2018 regulations, the concept was removed because the lead employer process seems to work a lot better in South Africa. So for all intents and purposes, the lead employer concept, where you have one employer that has a whole range of host employers under it, contracted to it, seems to be the preferred methodology in South Africa at the moment as the intermediary between learners and host employers and the funders. So I think for the foreseeable future, the lead employer concept, I think, will grow. We may have a different model if there is some more research, particularly the Australian model. They call it the GTO, which is a sort of training organization. The GTO model in Australia seems to work very well, and that may be implemented. We don't know. We'll see where research takes us. But as we stand now, lead employers are effectively the ASDSA. The other thing that I just want to mention, colleagues, you would have noticed that in the 2017 processes, it was the SETAs that registered learnerships with the Department of Higher Education and Training. These new regulations shifted that, and now it is effectively the QCTO. The regulation says that the Quality Council must register learnerships, but the only Quality Council that really deals with learnerships at this point in time is the QCTO. Maybe it allows for the CHE, which is learnerships in the higher education environment. It allows for them to register it, but they haven't done it yet. But the QCTO is moving quite rapidly now with learnerships, and I will demonstrate that for you in a minute or so. I'll come back to that. So now the QCTO is responsible for registering learnerships. I just want to mention one tension that exists in the regulations that I think is probably the one area that needs work. And those you who are making notes and so on, the tension relates to the time period between submitting learnership agreements to SETAs and the time that the SETAs have to actually formally register those learnerships. This refers to Regulation 5, subsection 4, as well as Regulation 7, subsection A. And we don't have time today to go into the great detail, but have a look at those. But you must also read it in conjunction with the Regulation 10.1. Now, I know I'm beginning to sound like a lawyer, guys, but unfortunately, if you want to understand these regulations, you need to understand those clauses. And this is about the 30-day period that employers have to submit to the SETA. If the SETA receives the agreement within 30 days, then they must register it. But it appears from what I've been reading and checking, and I had to double check myself, the regulations appear to be silent on the time that the SETA has to register the learnership. And that is a bit of a worry, and we need to fix that. It looks like it's a bit of a hole in the regulation. I might be wrong, but my reading is it might be a bit of a hole. And so we need to maybe close that hole and get even better. And of course, colleagues, if we can get ourselves onto digital platforms, if SETAs can start sharing their registration system so that we have one system across the country for the registration of learners, and it's a digital system, it will make our life so much easier. So, Andy, I'm just briefly, with the permission, I want to just quickly show the colleagues the learnership system. And I'm just going to go quickly to the QCTO website. Andy, can you guys see the QCTO website?
Yes, it's come up.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the new QCTO website. I would really encourage all of you, particularly training providers or skill development providers, you really need to get to know this website. It's a new website. It's a bit hard to work with, but once you get going with it, it's not bad. I just want to show you, if you look in the middle there, it says occupational qualifications. If you put your mouse over there, a whole lot of stuff comes up. And the second one from the bottom is learnerships. So if you click on there, and hopefully my internet is fast enough to get to the next page reasonably quick, what will pop up is a screen of the registered learnerships. And you have registered learnerships here, and then you have at the bottom a second screen that says learnerships recommended for DHET registration. Now, the nice thing in this particular process is that these registered learnerships are, the certificate for the learnership is available online. And I'll just demonstrate this. If you see where my mouse is, I've gone to the training and development practitioner, which is the level 5 qualification, 190 credits. And if you go on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a little gray thing that you click on that. And that is actually the learnership certificate. And you can download it, and you actually have a formal learnership certificate available from the QCTO website, signed by the department, which is very useful when you start to put in your annual financials and you want to start claiming back tax allowances and so on. So I think this is a really good service from QCTO that now allows us to actually access these learnership certificates online. I can't remember this service ever being available from the Department of Higher Education and Training or the SETAs, and so I think this is a real feather in the cap for the colleagues at the QCTO. So well done to them, and hopefully this will help us to move forward on our entire process, the skills development system. So that's my story. If I just go back to my slides. I finished there. And so John and Andy, if I can go on to the next slide, which is the next one, our next conversation, June the 18th with Sharon on the POPI Act. Please join us there. So that's the end of my story. Thanks, Andy and colleagues.
Florus, two final comments, both from John. Firstly, thanks for highlighting the need to change BE and Tax Act regulations. This is so critical to get work-based learning happening across SA. And then a further comment. This is a brilliant analysis of the new CETA WBLA regs. Thanks, Florus. Please share widely. And yeah, I echo that. I think yeah, thank you.
Absolute pleasure. And hopefully our membership will continue to benefit from being a member. And it's great being part of this professional body. We're getting very active, guys, and everybody I've talked to, when I mention ASDSA and they start looking at what we do, people, they are loving it. So let's go. Let's strengthen to our process. Thank you, colleagues.
Anybody got any final questions for Florus? I'm not seeing any further comments or questions, but please note there is the link for CPD points in the chat box if anybody wants to do that. Then I think we're done, hey? Thanks, everyone.
Okay, guys. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Yeah. Bye then.